This is the new Kevin Smith, the Great Witness Show. The New Adventure series is. We're here with Dean Kevin, who's going to be sharing his real side experiences with us, and we'll be commenting and asking questions. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you, Val, and hello, everybody. It's nice to be here again. I have one experience I'm going to share because it is quite a lengthy one. In this real side experience, I would initially be afforded with what I construed to be another future view regarding the potential experiential effects humanity might find itself walking into. What seems to be a current theme of my real side experiences recently are various aspects and facets of what may befall humanity, especially as it pertains to depopulation, potential planetary destruction, or adverse conditions and situations with various alien factors and variables thrown into the mix. A lot of free will, in other words. A lot of individuals deciding and choosing, agreeing with what they are, and then the effects are following. As is the nature of creation, with everyone individually, and in the case of shared agreed to ideas, collectively deciding to experience that which they do. As you program the consciousness with the ideas, so the simulation generates from them, like installing files into your computer game that must then feature within it, regardless of where the files, the ideas came from, be they our created ideas or those of others we are agreeing to. The result is the same. We experience what we have decided, what we have uploaded into our consciousness. The underlying foundation of the game of practically every individual in the simulator at this moment is that of agreement ideas that are based on the control, the ideas accepted into our game from the dark force reptilians, and so effectively we have decided to not only experience the simulation of them in our game, but all that they entail, their ideas and agendas. Everything can be broken down into ideas. The consciousness of another would be a collection of ideas, including the decided personality, attitudes, drives, and intent. So it's as though we have uploaded the dark force characters into our game by agreeing with them, and we also upload the ideas that make up their consciousness, the entire package of the idea that their created self is, like little animated characters that are programmed with certain attitudes, inclinations, and abilities. We place them in our computer game, and they do exactly as they are programmed to do. If they are dark force characters, then they will be according to such a consciousness and wreak havoc in our game. Also, we upload, in a sense, their capabilities, their strengths, weaknesses, abilities to manipulate, and in relation to our own consciousness created idea of self too. For we decide every particular of the simulation, who enters our experience, and in what capacity, and the extent of their impact and effect on our created personal self. For yes, it is the dark force character who has decided their consciousness, and the way they wish to conduct themselves, and their abilities, skills, capabilities, intellect, technological expertise, creational, manipulating acumen. We don't have a say in the decisions and choices of others. What we do dictate with our own simulation is firstly, if through agreement we allow them into our game, we upload their consciousness created character, and then the extent to which they can bring their abilities to bear on our simulation. For the power an individual has over us is based on the agreement we have extended and the agreement parameters. The controllers have gotten everyone to not only agree for their inclusion into their simulation, but agreement also that humanity and the various suppressed planets and species have no power and are at the mercy of these very controllers, and these agreements will translate the corresponding matching experience, as is the design of the simulators. We experience what we choose, what we decide. A little like these creationally powerful beings I have been encountering, that due to the intermingling and intermeshing of agreement throughout the overall consciousness of the simulator, they, just like the controllers, can feature in everyone's experience, as they have the agreement permissions, what with the overall agreement subconscious foundation being to the control of the dark forces. And yet these beings, with all their power, only can target certain individuals, according to additional agreements and attachments that specifically dictate that these beings can exact their misused skills adversely into the experience of certain individuals. For absent of agreements and attachments would be an awareness operating through a body vehicle, and always operating from a position of making sense with the awareness that it is, doing that which benefits life, that which benefits its process of ultimately recognizing the isness, and so all the actions through the personal self will be to that end. Only then, if it makes sense, will certain experiences be allowed to occur. If it facilitates the awareness process, and the incursion of creationally powerful beings, and the disruption they will surely cause, will not be agreed upon, unless for whatever reason it actually provides a benefit, awareness speaking. But of course, with the personal self, making its free will decisions and agreements that it does, with the real awareness disconnect that takes place when individuals begin to personal self free will decide, until such time as the connection, if decided upon, is re-established. But until then, the personal self is making all manner of agreements and attachment forging that will set the stage for endless lifetimes to come for the presence of countless individuals into their experience. And should the agreement also be that such individuals have a power over them, then these are additional permissions that allow such powerful beings to carry out their mischief. For with agreement to their presence alone, they will, yes, do what they do, bring their misused abilities to bear. But if the personal self doesn't agree to be subjugated and at the mercy of such abilities, then the real awareness will always then be able to act, deal with the attacks, to do what makes sense with life and itself. And as such, in may come these beings, but the real awareness can deal with it, because there are no contrary personal self agreements that allow the personal self to be victimized and attacked, no agreements that an individual has power over us, which in essence would be the personal self's decision to experience this if such agreements were in place, and the real awareness can't then protect its personal self effectively. For although the real awareness would automatically do what makes sense with its animated body vehicle, the personal self has decided otherwise, and so the personal self experiences the imposition of the creationally powerful being, with the real awareness doing all it can within and around the parameters of what the personal self has decided through its agreements, mostly subconscious, unless on the occasion the real awareness could intercede, or the guides could, but instead allow the attack for various reasons that this makes sense to do so, generally if it may benefit the awareness process. For we can learn and become aware through adversity, challenge and confrontation far more so than if the experiences are that which present as no challenge whatsoever. And with these individuals being allowed to do what they do, so can the effects be managed creatively. They can be displaced, put in the phantom zone, simply experiencing then what they have in fact decided. And had their chosen ways of operating been blocked, so would there be no karma to work with. Again, it is their choice to be abrasive, and sometimes they are allowed, just that they can then be displaced. But anyway, so the overall game arena is set. The agreements to the controllers throughout the overall consciousness, and the agreement to their power and control over the consciousness, which allows their constant presence and to do what they want, to wield this power any way they wish, in the destructive ways that they do. As the overall consciousness has been constructed, that is a decision then to basically experience this, and so the real awareness can't prevent or manage the situation in ways that would be beneficial with life and awareness, because the personal selves overwhelmingly have decided otherwise. And with humanity then, the potentiality for the dark forces' various destructive schemes are there, as their intent now is to completely control the humans, depopulate, and if necessary, destroy them utterly, if they can't have their control. But this is where the dark forces must also work within the exact parameters of the agreements as to what they can unleash on humanity, and they try everything they can to steer agreement through the marketing ploys, the subconscious subliminals, etc. And when these future views are afforded, these seem to be endless expressions and variety of the various agendas and possibilities the dark forces wish humanity to agree with, and if they get a certain agreement through, so it becomes humanity's collective, simulated reality. And as agreement fluctuates, so must the effect outcome, instantly so on the real side, as everything is an isness, and in reality everything is instantly what it is. Ideas, decisions, agreements, instantly what they are, but agreements take a few moments to process through the cause and effect mechanism, to be so on the physical, and only then, if a certain agreement is maintained, will it become a physical level actuality. And so these future views are never a done deal. They are just what humanity is overall deciding at the moment the view is afforded. And so will there be endless variety of the specifics of humanity's collective effects yet to be, and all of them exist now, like dimensional creations in their own right. But what becomes a physical happening depends on which of the specific agreements are maintained. This particular view, then, was again not dissimilar to others I've recently had, where evidently some almighty global catastrophe or situation had occurred, very likely controller instigated, with the agreements that allow them to do so, and an extreme depopulation event the result. In this case, nothing much had been destroyed, no decimation of houses, streets, structure, or the environment, suggesting something had specifically eliminated humans and spared everything else. Perhaps something vaccination orientated, or a bio-weapon of some description, although the exact nature and cause of the depopulation wasn't made apparent in the experience. Also, interestingly, the scene would open up in my street. It was a global event, yes, but the reasoning for the inclusion of my street in experiences I have explained before. When events or situations are getting close to being so on the physical, that agreement has been maintained to a specific idea long enough that it's set to become a physical level occurrence, the idea will be presented with my street as the overall scene or backdrop. That just as experiences can occur in the top floor of our recreated houses, representing the real side, and then filter to the ground floor, representing that the real side happenings are now filtering through to the personal self and becoming known to the personal self. For an unconscious, unaware individual, for something to be on the ground floor must have it within their limited awareness view, so it must be rather a physical level experience. So it is for these overall agreements that they begin on the real side, then will feature in my street, indicating that the overall agreement is filtering into the personal self experiential view of all those who are maintaining such agreements. And as these will be the unconscious unaware, for it to enter their view must have it on the physical level, represented by the ideas now being present in my street. And although getting set to become a physical actuality, there still are a few moments before it becomes so, and agreement still then may change, thus preventing what is seen in my street from transpiring. So as I was saying, the depopulation event had taken place. The initial scene was my street, indicating this as an impending event, with a group of survivors, one of many little groups throughout the earth. When it comes to these experiences, we can have a number of ways in which we can view them. We can just be the real awareness aside from creation view and simply observe without interjection, or we can engage with the idea of the experience and feature in the effects, or with any of the individuals, which would amount to the same thing, as the idea of them would be interwoven with the scene that they must have then had an agreement hand in effecting. So as we agree with an individual, we take on the effects of them and their effected simulations that we can directly involve ourselves with, or we can view through the personal self of any individual in creation and experience that which they are viewing, experiencing, effecting at that moment. As we are all this one awareness that animates through all the body forms and the simulation they each effect, so the real awareness that we are can simply show us a view through the perceptions of another individual, another personal self. Our personal self then is shown the experience of another personal self, as we temporarily place our awareness into a different personal self and become that individual and what they experience, and then the extent to which we maintain the real awareness connection dictates the extent to which we recognize at the time of the experience if we are observing through another personal self, or if we think at the time that this other personal self is who we are. Because with awareness locked into a personal self, it's like taking on another computer game and identity, but absent of the realization that all personal selves are just vehicles for experiencing a creation and not that which we actually are. And sometimes this real awareness disconnect will be so in such circumstances that it affords a more intense experience, more memorable, than were we more objective and indifferent to it, with a maintained real awareness connection, as though watching a movie. So at the time of the experience, if disconnected from the real awareness, we may think we are this personal self, and the simulation and circumstances they are the effects of, at the time we have this fully immersive view. This would be one such experience, and again would make the simulation of it seem far more real, like being in a movie rather than watching it. So I was experiencing this future potential and very possibly imminent human event through the view of one of the individuals who would be a part of this agreed to collective effect, should it come to pass. But as everything is, this was in reality actually taking place at that moment, therefore. But it was as though the dark forces were aware of my full immersion future view through one of the future view participants, as of course anything transpiring simulation-wise they will be aware of on the real side. The dark forces share the overall simulation throughout the dimensions of it, and with immersion in a simulation that stems from a consciousness overall that is interspersed with agreements to the controllers, so as we engage with the simulation or simulated consciousness of another, the dark forces can step in at any time and interfere, disrupt, and attack. And again, our defense capabilities through the real awareness then depends on the personal self, and what agreements in regards to the dark forces and their power over the personal self it harbours. In this case, it's as though The dark forces or the influence had animated and motivated a random individual to be present, and although the personal self didn't recognize the individual, the real awareness impressions were of some emotional attachment from a lifetime long ago. This individual would attempt to almost entice me through attachments that once were present but no longer. She would request that I go with her, and although she seemed sincere enough, though an unconscious, unaware individual, she was manipulated to attempt to draw me in, as it were, and should I have gone with her, it wouldn't have been an issue. I could simply have recognized my error and made the adjustments. As any agreements we make, we can just as easily retract, and the controllers would know this, but their scheme was to have me go with this individual, and very likely the experience would have ended and become something else entirely, and no further details of this experience that was being shown to me would I have. A cunning tactic that the dark forces can utilize to block us from seeing or being shown certain things. But again, we are the deciders, and we decide to be derailed, disrupted, or distracted. And so I would disregard this individual, and she would fade from the scene, looking bewildered as to my dismissal of her. For as this dark force tactic had been used, so had I automatically been pulled from my full immersion into the personal self of another, that I had the sense to recognize this situation through the real awareness reconnect, and ensure that I wasn't drawn from this experience view. The real awareness doing then what was needed that made sense given the circumstances. But my personal self had to decide to either dismiss the woman or follow her. The real awareness simply gave the personal self the insight as to the situation as I was reconnected with it, and then what happened next depended on the personal self. And maybe the individual I had the immersion view through had had affiliation with this woman also, thus allowing her insertion into the experience, as she would be a part of the agreements through the consciousness of the one I was viewing through, and so could feature or be placed in the experience of this individual at any time. Anyway, I would learn as I continued with this view that the surviving humans were not doomed to their situation, that an option was available, and although I didn't have the specifics of it, the idea seemed to be some location that all survivors could go to if they so chose, where at a certain moment they would be afforded evacuation from the planet. My impression was of benevolent, making sense with life and awareness, real guide-backed aliens of some kind, as though this were an arranged option being made available for what humans remained, but only if they so chose. Or maybe it was that only those that would have the option were perhaps those that were more aware, as always with an awareness process embraced, so are greater options and opportunities always afforded. As we step into our real awareness intent, so life, the real awareness, and the guides then facilitate situations that benefit and support the awareness process we have decided, as life always supports the real awareness that it and we all are, if we decide to let life in, and if we don't, then we are deciding through the personal self that which doesn't then make sense, awareness speaking, and we rather are left to our own devices. We can't be supported with an awareness process, which may involve relocation to safer places that it can continue, that we have free will decided against. It seemed clarification was required, and so the scene would switch from the plight of the humans and the possibility of alien rescue to the actual aliens involved with this extraction, for again I was afforded a full immersion into the personal self of one of these aliens' view. The aliens seemed very militarily inclined, not reptilians, humanoid more so, but with a slight variation that I couldn't quite determine, as when you are fully immersed into another's personal self, you don't consider so much your appearance and that of your species. They may have been Pleiadian, and I was one of a group of individuals on a military assignment. We had these sophisticated laser-like weapons, so evidently were anticipating a conflict. We were infiltrating some place or other, but unbeknownst to this military group and myself, what was lurking there seemed to be curious, diminutive beings that were like parasites. They would latch onto the military soldiers, seemingly hypnotize them, inducing a kind of trance, then be absorbed into the very bodies of the military individuals and possess them, take complete control of their body vehicles. I would experience this also through the immersion view I had, and so I would feel the trance-like state, experience the brain fog sensations that descended upon me, and it was as though I was a prisoner in my own body with no control of it. Again, the feeling of it, how it affected the body vehicle, would not have been apparent had I not had full immersion, if I had, say, just been observing, and from such an observing capacity these little details can be lost. The idea was that the possessed, controlled military unit would return to their home world, carrying these parasite beings, and the parasites then would puppeteer the controlled military body vehicles of these aliens to carry out various assassinations, and their targets were dignitaries, royalty, individuals of influence and prominence within this alien species that this military unit were a part of, who, as I said, I had the impression were possibly Pleiadian. And the scene would switch, and into a kind of a palace I would find myself, still through the view of the possessed soldier amidst the others who were equally controlled by the curious parasite beings. We were in a grand hall or other, and finely dressed dignitaries of the species were in attendance, with the parasite beings, as I said, intending assassination of these highly placed individuals. For, as I mentioned, these were the very aliens that intended the rescue of the human survivors. Some negotiation or arrangement with the guides, very likely. But as with all these alien species and beings, always it's dealing with attitudes and delicate personal self-egos and sensitivities, and in the end it's always the free will of any being to do or assist with anything. And in fact, were the assassinations carried out, this would have the alien species decide against extracting the humans, as though they would take on the consideration of a betrayal or other. Their reasoning for it was unclear, but that would be the result. And so these parasite beings were working with the dark forces, their mission to prevent the humans from being saved through the possession of these hosts, that when returning to this palace and in the presence of the dignitary aliens, so would the parasite beings utilize the body vehicles they had possessed to carry out the assassinations, which would result in a decision to not help the humans. Also, it seemed, these parasites had the ability of not only possessing body vehicles, but making duplicates of them also, like instant clones, and the parasite would have control of all the clones it then created from the original host. And a telltale sign, the only indicator of this possession, seemed to be that one of the nostrils would be clogged up with some material or other, like a curious blockage, that was in some way a part of this parasitical being's body. It was as though it had lodged in the brain, and part of it blocked one of the nostrils. I would never see the assassination take place, for I had the impression that with agreements extended to the guides that this alien race had, and although the military unit had no conscious control now of their body vehicles, that the guides would in some way intercede and prevent this situation from taking place. For yes, with agreement, the real awareness and the guides can do what makes sense in every moment. That is overall awareness beneficial. And even though I wouldn't see what transpired, my impression was that the guides would act and displace these parasite beings, or interject in some way that the dignitaries wouldn't be killed, and the human rescue would then still take place. For I had a real side experience a few nights previously, where again I saw the view of a depopulated Earth, only this time the planet more barren, desolated, and amidst what remained were the human survivors. But interestingly, there seemed to be a race of beings that appeared as though they occupied a position above the planet. My impression was that it were a race of aliens occupying a large platform, a kind of space station that was around the Earth. The possibility also was that these aliens were positioned in a different dimensional level, maybe the astral, but either way, there they were, monitoring the humans that had survived. The humans were unaware of these aliens, and of the Dark Force controllers there was no sign. As with a number of these future views, if the Dark Forces pull off their intended planetary catastrophes, they tend to have evacuated the planet and left the humans to their fate. These alien beings looked again humanoid, but had pointed ears like elves. I'm unsure if they were the same aliens I would see in this recent experience, those that had elected to rescue the humans. But the human rescuers were Pleiadian, I'm fairly certain. And I'm not sure if Pleiadians have pointy, elf-like ears. This feature I didn't really notice, but it seemed that these aliens who were monitoring the humans after some devastating Earth event suggested events that had occurred beyond those I had seen in the recent experience. For in that experience, as I said, the humans had been depopulated, but the planet had not been devastated. So maybe the devastation came at a later moment. Perhaps then the humans, those who had decided, or those who were perhaps on their awareness process, so had additional options, had already been rescued before the cataclysmic events racked the planet, courtesy of the agreeable aliens from the recent experience. And then maybe those that were left, the humans, had experienced the tumultuous Earth events, but evidently despite which a number had survived, and now this other alien species, or maybe the same aliens, were monitoring the situation. And in addition, it seemed that they would select certain human survivors and rather translocate them to their space base or dimensional position, but only if they were viable candidates, and those selected would be put through aptitude tests of a kind that if they failed, were returned to Earth. The tests seem to be regarding the natural environment in some way or other, as though indicating that although these remaining humans hadn't quite made the awareness grade, as it were, their intent in regards to the is may be found wanting, so they missed the rescue bus, so to speak, that some, however, still had enough intent and focus that it's as though, once again, options are afforded for those who make any kind of effort in regards to their awareness process. For, of course, the natural environment represents the is in creation, and these tests seemed in some way rather to be gauging the extent to which the surviving humans were choosing to stand real with life, and if not, so they would be rather doomed to the effects of themselves, which at that moment were not very favourable. So these future views of depopulation seem to be very likely and imminent, based on agreements as they stand. But it does seem that before this occurs, the human race, by and large, come to know of the opportunity of the is, and from there make their decisions as to if they will begin their journeys of is recognition or not. And we see then that those that choose poorly, in ways that don't make sense, that are personal self-serving only decisions, are rather then resigned to the effects of what they have in fact decided, through agreements in the consciousness they retain to the controllers. But for those humans that do step up, and according to the extent that they do, and embrace the real purpose, so are options afforded. For some humans, they are then extracted prior to what may be potential planetary dark force orchestrated disasters. For others, they may have to suffer through them, but still have options if they have enough real intent that these options are afforded, via all the agreeable alien beings that facilitate such rescues. But again, the aliens must decide also, and the dark forces are determined to wipe out the human race and sabotage the delicate negotiations with the would-be human rescuers in any way they can. And also, I had another brief view of a species of insectoid-like aliens who seemed very technologically orientated, as I would find myself on one of their spacecraft, a craft that was part of a fleet. These insectoid beings were sincere-intented. My impressions were that they were stepping up also and assisting the guides in various capacities, including the situations on Earth with the humans. But again, a similar occurrence to the experience with the parasite-like beings, where some infestation invaded the space fleet, a kind of organic, sentient material that intended to, in some way or other, assimilate the insect beings and take them over, take control of their body vehicles, and just like the other parasite beings, to then control the stolen body vehicles and use them for nefarious purposes. For this infestation was a kind of a being or other, a kind of a collective consciousness. It reminded me a little of the Blob from the movie with the same name, though more plant-like, and also that it was affiliated and working on behalf of the dark forces, with whatever agreements that had been secured between the reptilian dark forces and this curious expression of a body type. What transpired never was made very clear to my personal self, only that my impressions were that a group and myself were deployed to intercede on behalf of the insect beings, and whatever we did, we managed to rid their ships of the infestation and prevent the insectoid beings being possessed and taken over by it. The insect beings evidently agreeable with the guides, but vulnerable to attacks in all the forms these can take via the dark forces, through agreements to the dark forces that are prevalent throughout the overall consciousness of this simulator, and so a case of other beings being agreeable to interject and take on the effects, to assist the insectoids and deal with effects they had really decided for themselves, though likely through subconscious agreements, etc. And it will be interesting to see what role these insectoid-like beings take, how things develop in regards to them, and indeed where their space fleet is headed. Perhaps it is joining the myriad of other alien species and spacecraft that are in orbit currently around the Earth.
Okay, that's a long story, yeah. I like it. You talked about your experiences on the street. When things come close in the physical, you have experiences on your street. It's an indicator to you usually that something's getting closer. And I see that with Dwayne. Well, with Dwayne, he's got a lot of things too that he gets little hints, demonstrations, birds flying over, finding things in the sand here at the beach, mainly referring to the funding. It's getting close, but how close in terms of physical time is another thing, because there is such thing as agreements and free will. So, like he said too, that plays a factor in it. It can be close, but then there has to still be the final agreement through free will with the others that participate in whatever. So it's a constant. Just keep the focus. If you're wanting to, in this case with the funding, that's been the focus for many, many years now, and there's been signs and the other guides have shown him certain things, but then at the last minute, many times people opt out of their agreements. So it's day by day, moment by moment. You mentioned life supports the real awareness, which is us, and you mentioned the prisoner in their own bodies. Well, that's like I see that for most people here in the physical, even though there's no so-called, well, it could be like parasites or whatever, but they're beings taking over the body. We're still prisoners in our body because it's under almost full-time aggravation and pressure. So in a way, even if you do have the awareness, it's still under pressure and aggravation, and we're still prisoners in a sense here. But with our real awareness, we can step outside, you could say, of that physical part of ourselves, that personal part of ourselves, which is important for kind of a relief or recovery. But if a person doesn't know about that, then they're totally stressed and prone to diseases and emotional distress, etc., and more easily being apt to being controlled. Um, and then you talked about screening. Yeah, the screening part of people in our communities too would be screening people, and make sure they are focused on the natural environment and they're sincere. So as they come in and they start contributing in some way, they must really have a focus on that, something with a real focus. So the screening, we won't just let anybody in, but it'll be so that everybody benefits from their being around us and our projects, environmental projects. So everybody's really focused. They're not just there for the money or for this and that relationships, but a real true purpose, which in the end is becoming more aware. Um, and I see you as a doer on the real side, Kevin. You're really like active, um, doing all these adventures and projects and missions. It's just wonderful to hear what you're doing there, and it's just great that you could share everything that you're doing and provide this for others that need to hear it. Okay, Ronald, do you have anything to comment or question?
Yeah, the idea of the virus, and it says that you said it clogs the nose, one side of the nose. I guess it's a good enough definition, I guess, that you can have for what you see. It's sort of blends in with what Al Bielek said when he in 2137 that he asked what the population was. And I think the population was somewhere like 500 million people, I think. So evidently these events are going to take place. That sort of confirms it. And another thing is when Andrew Bishal, I guess that's how you pronounce it, said when he time traveled from 1972 to 2012, he found that there was 100 foot of water at the Supreme Court, but others traveled there later and said it was dry. So each one of us live in a different world. So the world you're living in is going to be different maybe than the world that I live in. And my experiences may be different than yours. So there's a whole lot here to learn, and you covered a lot of area.
It wasn't exactly a virus, it was a parasitical-like being that was able to absorb itself into an individual on contact and then almost occupy them like a parasite. It sort of would sit in the brain, and part of its body would cause a blockage in one of the nostrils, and that would be the indicator of someone being possessed by one of these parasites. So it's
Some
more
of that's going on now, I think. Some of these guys that go out there and start shooting a lot of people, and they're probably part of this group that's just starting. I think their brains are all taken over by parasites.
Nanos, yeah, certainly nanos. We've got a lot of those in our bodies, you know, little computer robots. Yeah, Kevin, you keep on getting these experiences with the what's coming, what's potentially coming. Just got to keep alert, be creative. I know Dwayne's got a lot of things going on with it, you know, how to offset what's coming with vaccinations and other things that potentially can harm the physical body. Yeah.
Well, there's one good thing to know, that these guys that are doing this, they're creating karma too, and they're going to have to pay for their deeds. So, paydays are coming.
Yeah, that's where the real guides have an opening for payback. And that's why they let sometimes Dwayne have physical ailments. So when he's attacked, they let the attack through so they can go respond to the assailants. Okay. So thank you again. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Ron. NUUU. Ron.
NUUU.
NUUU.